Some betrayals don't need screaming matches or shattered glass. Sometimes, the most powerful response is silence paired with a husband who doesn't have to be reminded of your worth. This story isn't about revenge. It's about Arielle Vaughn, a woman who gave everything to the wrong man, and then rebuilt her life so gracefully that when she finally met his mistress, face to face, she introduced her to the billionaire who now calls her wife. If you've ever stayed quiet while someone underestimated you, if you've ever poured into a person who drained you, if you've ever wondered whether walking away without burning bridges is strength or weakness, stay here, because this story will show you that walking away with your head high and your heart intact is the loudest thing you'll ever do. Welcome to Mr. Charles Stories, where every heartbreak holds a life lesson. Tap subscribe, hit like if this opening hits something inside you, and let's begin. Arielle Vaughn didn't need noise to make a statement. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and didn't rush to speak, because the room adjusted anyway. Calm posture, careful choices, a presence that said, "I see everything, even if I don't say a word." By 34, she had already built a name in brand strategy, quietly advising founders, reshaping small businesses, helping people position their dreams like polished diamonds in crowded markets. She didn't chase the spotlight, but she knew how to direct it, and she did it well. When she met Nolan Lennox at a founders mixer in downtown Atlanta, she wasn't looking for love. He was charming, casual, all energy and unfinished ideas. He had a tech concept that was halfway there, some AI-powered consumer tool that didn't fully make sense yet. He had no team, no pitch, and no plan. But what he had was charisma. People liked him, wanted to believe in him. He talked a good game, and when he found out Arielle worked in branding, he asked to buy her a drink. That night, they stood outside the venue talking for almost an hour. Nolan was all fire and dreams. Arielle was water and strategy. She didn't believe in hype, she believed in structure. But when he said, "I'm not great at Polish, but I know how to hustle," she smiled. "You'll burn yourself out without polish," she told him. He laughed. "Then I guess I need you." They started slowly. A few calls, then weekend brainstorms, then a soft relationship that turned serious after a few months. He was younger, 2 years her junior, and less established. But Arielle wasn't impressed by resumes. She was drawn to possibility. She helped him clean up his pitch, designed his first investor deck, rewrote his business summary for a local accelerator, sat with him through long nights as he worked out bugs with a dev partner in Austin. He told people, "My wife is a genius." But what he meant was, "She does the work I don't know how to do." By year 2, Nolan's name was gaining traction in the Atlanta tech space. By year 3, he landed seed funding from a regional VC group. And by year 4, he had an office space, a team, and a public profile. But no one knew Arielle had written the emails he sent, that she taught him how to speak to executives without sounding too casual, that every clean photo of him on LinkedIn was taken by her, with a Canon she'd bought years ago when she still thought photography might be her creative side hustle. Behind every quote he gave in Forbes Tech South, there was a woman who coached him through it. Not for applause, not for clout, for love. She never asked for credit, never posted about their late nights, never showed off the moments when she saved him from costly missteps. That wasn't her style. She wasn't building her brand through him. She was building him because she believed in who he could become. But what Arielle didn't expect was for Nolan to forget who stood in the shadows once the stage lights got hot. Arielle noticed it first in his tone. He wasn't cruel, just distracted. He stopped asking what she thought before pitching ideas, stopped reviewing documents with her before public speaking events. He'd kiss her on the forehead like a CO worker, not a woman he used to undress with his eyes. The intimacy hadn't completely died, but it no longer lived in the way he touched her. It was in the margins now. Performative, predictable. She told herself it was stress. He was managing a growing team, launching a new software update, traveling more, but something deeper had shifted. Their once synchronized rhythms, late-night talks, morning check-ins, shared playlists over Sunday brunch, were offbeat now. He had new routines that didn't include her, and new scents that didn't belong to her either. She didn't want to sound paranoid, but she wasn't naive either. Ariel noticed small clues, and his cologne changed, heavier, more masculine, the kind women notice. His gym visits increased, but his body hadn't changed much. His phone? Always face down. When she asked about something he mentioned a week before, he'd say, "Did I say that?" or "I don't remember." It wasn't the lies that broke her. It was the effort he put into not caring whether she caught them. One Sunday morning, Nolan left his phone charging in the kitchen while he showered. Ariel was making tea when the screen lit up. She didn't move toward it, but the message preview glowed against the marble counter like it wanted to be seen. "Last night was unforgettable. Still thinking about your hands." No name. Just the sentence. Ariel didn't flinch. She read it once, then turned off the stove. That night, they lay side by side in bed. His back was to her. She stared at the ceiling. No tears, no anger, no explosion, just awareness. She had two choices, confront or confirm, and Ariel had never been the type to yell before she was sure. So she waited. Over the next week, she watched closely. Nolan had a dinner meeting 2 nights later, supposedly with a developer. He came home late. There was a smudge on his shirt. Lip gloss, if she had to guess. But she said nothing. He slept soundly. She did not. Friday came. He said he had a business happy hour. Ariel nodded, kissed his cheek, and followed his Uber route on the old business profile he forgot to deactivate. He went to the same steakhouse they used to go to when they were celebrating milestones. She took a different ride, showed up 30 minutes later, and asked for a table facing the patio. That's when she saw them. The woman was young, not immature, but young enough to believe that a married man buying you dinner was flattering. She was laughing, touching his hand across the table, wearing a coral dress Ariel had once worn to Nolan's birthday dinner. She watched for 10 minutes, not with jealousy, but with clarity. That was the night Ariel accepted that the man she married no longer existed, or maybe he never fully had. She left the restaurant unseen, didn't text him, didn't wait up. When Nolan returned later, he acted normal, set his keys down, kissed her on the head, said he was tired. She nodded. She had already packed the guest bedroom with her essentials. She wouldn't leave that night, but she was already gone. 3 days later, while Nolan was on another meeting, Ariel moved out. She didn't own the house. Her name was on no asset, no shared accounts, no co-owned properties, no legal binds outside of marriage. He once said that made things easier in case of emergencies. Now she understood. He had planned for her to always stay behind the scenes, but she wasn't bitter. She left the key on the marble kitchen island, took only what was hers, and texted one sentence. "Thank you for showing me who I was, without you." She didn't hear back for 2 weeks, and she didn't need to, because by then, she had already started again. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, modest kitchen, no views. But it was hers. Ariel sat on the floor the first night with a glass of orange wine and no furniture. Her suitcase lay unzipped in the corner. Boxes were half packed, half forgotten. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. But in that tiredness, there was peace. No more pretending. No more wondering where Nolan was or who he was texting. Just her, a quiet space, and a fresh browser tab labeled Vaughan.studio, brand strategy and identity. It had been years since she used her maiden name professionally. She wasn't sure what her voice sounded like anymore when it wasn't wrapped around someone else's ambition. But rebuilding doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with action. So she started writing. A fresh pitch deck, a revised offer list, a site redesign using the last of her freelance funds. She slept on a mattress on the floor for 2 weeks, cooked in silence, took client calls at the kitchen counter because her desk hadn't arrived, But for the first time in years, every decision was hers alone. Her second week in that apartment, she sent 6 emails to former contacts. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet announcement. I'm relaunching my consulting studio. If you or someone you know needs brand clarity or strategy support, I'm open to short-term contracts. 2 replied. One was a polite decline. The other was Calvin Ricks, an old client who ran a boutique health and wellness brand in North Carolina. You still got that magic touch, Ariel? Because my new expansion rollout has been a disaster. She smiled as she typed her response. Let me see what you're working with. They hopped on a call that Friday. Calvin showed her a messy campaign pitch for a new product line. It was all over the place. No cohesion, no story, no hook. She worked through the weekend. By Monday, she had rebuilt the positioning, slogan, tagline, and influencer pitch deck. On Tuesday, Calvin wired $6,500 to her account. Your rates are still too low, he said, but I'll let it slide this time. That win was small, but it unlocked something. She wasn't rusty. She wasn't broken. She was just quiet, and the world had mistaken her silence for emptiness. In truth, she was full of power. She had just been giving it away. By the 3rd month, Ariel was flying to Charlotte twice a month. One of Calvin's investors ran a private equity firm that was restructuring its public image. They needed help. He referred her. She pitched. She landed the contract. Her retainer was more than Nolan ever paid himself in the first year of business. She didn't feel the need to share that with anyone. Instead, she bought herself a proper desk, a second-hand reading chair, upgraded her wardrobe, cut her hair into something shorter, sharper. She looked in the mirror one morning and caught herself smiling, not because she was over the pain, but because she was now facing forward. She only cried once. It was a Thursday. She had just wrapped a call with a difficult client and saw her wedding dress still, hanging in her closet. The last thing she hadn't boxed up or thrown away. She sat on the floor again, not like the first night. This time she leaned into her knees and let the tears come. Quiet, steady grief. Grief for the time she gave, the version of herself she'd sacrificed, and the woman she didn't protect back when her needs were labeled too much. But when she stood, she felt lighter. She folded the dress, sealed it in a donation box, and walked it to the elevator. That evening, she poured herself another glass of orange wine and updated her website bio. I specialize in helping overlooked visionaries find their voice. It wasn't just a tagline. It was a homecoming. The branding summit in DC wasn't on Ariel's radar. She almost declined the invitation. But the client she'd helped in Charlotte, the one whose brand she saved from collapse, insisted she attend. They need a real strategist on that panel, he said. You don't have to speak, just sit in the front row, trust me. So she went. No expectations, no pressure, just a crisp black blazer, natural curls, and a notebook filled with half-sketched ideas. The summit was held at a luxury hotel downtown, the kind with triple-height ceilings, polished concrete floors, and gold-framed signage that whispered wealth instead of screaming it. Ariel arrived late. She slipped into the back of a side room, labeled Emerging Investment Trends and Brand Architecture. Halfway through the panel, a voice pulled her attention away from her notes. Calm, intentional, deep but not performative. Your brand doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be undeniable. She looked up. The speaker had presence, controlled, commanding, but not arrogant. He didn't dress for attention. He was attention. He was clean-shaven, maybe late 30s, dark hair with a streak of silver at the temple. His suit was dark grey, crisp, collar slightly open. Sterling Callan. The name was printed on the panel slide behind him, managing partner, Asheville Capital Group. She didn't know much about his firm, but the room listened when he spoke. No fluff, no jargon, just insight delivered with precision. When the session ended, Sterling stepped down and was instantly swarmed by attendees, startup founders, VCs, press interns trying to get quotes. Ariel didn't move. She watched, observed, took a few notes about his structure, his pacing, then quietly left the room and headed for the refreshments. She was pouring tea when a voice spoke beside her. "You take better notes than most of the panelists." She turned, startled. It was him, Sterling. No assistant, no entourage, just a linen pocket square and a steady gaze. She smiled slightly. "Force of habit. You weren't recording, just writing. I retain better when I write, especially when the speaker actually says something worth remembering." He chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." They talked for 15 minutes. Not about business. About rhythm. How some people talk to fill space and others talk to offer substance. She mentioned how most brands don't know who they are until they're in crisis. He said that's exactly when his firm tends to get involved. It wasn't flirtatious. It was mutual recognition. Two grown people who didn't need to impress each other. When she returned to her hotel room later that evening, she didn't expect anything. But the next morning, when she stepped into the lobby to check out, the concierge called her name. "Miss Vaughan, a delivery for you." It was a bouquet. White calla lilies. Clean, elegant. No note, just a card, embossed with the letters SC, a number on the back. She stared at it for a while before sliding it into her planner. Later that evening, she texted him. "Ariel, you could have just said you enjoyed the conversation. Sterling, some conversations don't need repeating. They need following up." That was the start. They texted for days, then phone calls. 2 weeks later, she met him for dinner in Atlanta, discreet, low-key, in a tucked-away wine bar he'd been to once during a merger negotiation. He asked about her work, but not like most men asked. He wanted to know why she started branding. "What made you care about how people are seen?" She paused before answering, then said, "Because people mistake silence for invisibility." "I've been both." He didn't nod sympathetically. He didn't rush to respond. He just looked at her and said, "That's one of the clearest answers I've ever heard." There was no game, no timeline. Their connection wasn't built on adrenaline or rebound energy. It was slow, steady, intentional. He didn't ask about Nolan, but one night, over dinner, she brought it up herself. "Most people think betrayal makes you angry, but it didn't make me angry. It made me quiet." Sterling didn't reach for her hand. He didn't say something wise. He just said, "You don't have to explain why you left. I respect that you did." And that night, they kissed. Not because she wanted to forget Nolan, but because, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to prove she was enough. She just was. Have you ever walked away from someone without a dramatic exit? Just quiet strength? It's easy to think we need to shout to be heard, but sometimes silence is how we reclaim ourselves. Ariel didn't slam doors or send long messages. She just moved on and rebuilt. Have you ever left without looking back? Drop A in the comments if you've ever chosen peace over chaos. And if Ariel's story reminds you of your own, hit subscribe so you never miss a moment of strength like this. The first time Nolan saw her again, it wasn't in person. It was on LinkedIn. Ariel had just updated her profile. No announcement, no dramatic rebrand, just a simple tagline, helping overlooked visionaries find their voice. No mention of him. No photos from the years they spent building his image. Her new logo was clean, sharp and modern, a slate blue monogram that echoed elegance and restraint. And in the corner of the post that had already started gaining traction, her face, fresh curls, new cut, that quiet confidence she'd always carried, but now no longer dimmed for anyone. Nolan didn't like the post, didn't comment, but he stared at it for a long time. He told his assistant to cancel his next call, then sat alone in his office, scrolling through her website. She had clients listed, testimonials, strategy breakdowns, a blog that had been shared hundreds of times. He clicked on a piece titled, "What you build in silence is what they'll hear when you're gone." He didn't read it. He couldn't. Meanwhile, Ariel was never trying to be seen by him. That part of her life, the part that waited for someone to recognize her sacrifices, was over. Now, her days were full. Mornings with coffee and client decks. Midday calls with founders across time zones. Afternoons reviewing campaign assets. Her studio had grown. She hired a part-time assistant, contracted a brand copywriter, outsourced bookkeeping. She wasn't chasing recognition. She was building sustainability, the kind of business she used to dream about when she was backstage preparing Nolan's pitch. Now she stood on her own stage, and she didn't even need applause. Her weekends with Sterling was something else entirely. They never felt performative. He didn't reward her independence. He expected it. Their relationship was rooted in mutual self-sufficiency. Two people who had lived long enough to know that love wasn't built on flattery or need. It was built on clarity. She would spend Saturday mornings on the couch in his penthouse, hair wrapped, barefaced, sipping tea, while he reviewed portfolios across his desk in the corner. Sometimes they'd talk. Sometimes they wouldn't. But the silence was never uncomfortable. It was safe. One morning, while reviewing a deck, Sterling looked up from his screen. "You know you're undercharging again, right?" Ariel smirked without looking up. "You know that's not your lane, right?" "Just saying. You bring in results firms charge triple for. It's time your rates reflect that." She let out a soft sigh. "One step at a time," he nodded. "But make sure you're stepping forward, not just working harder." That was the thing about Sterling. He didn't tell her what to do. He reminded her of what she already knew. The more time they spent together, the more effortless it became. He met her family. Her younger sister adored him. They spent time at quiet restaurants, art showings, and rooftop jazz nights. But no headlines, no red carpets. Sterling could afford it, but he wasn't interested in noise. One night, after a long dinner and slow dancing in the living room, he said something that caught her breath. "I'm not just proud of who you've become, Ariel. I'm proud of how you didn't let what happened shrink you." She didn't respond at first. He added, "You expanded. That takes more strength than revenge ever will." She rested her head against his chest and whispered, "Thank you for seeing that." But Nolan was starting to feel the loss in sharper ways. It wasn't just the LinkedIn post. It was the investor who mentioned her name during a brunch. "You know Ariel Vaughan's working with Ashvale now, right? Girl's moving. Quietly, but she's on fire." Nolan forced a smile. "Oh yeah. We used to work together a while back." But he hated how his throat tightened when he said it, because the truth was she had made him look good. Now she was making herself look untouchable. He had a new girl now, Brielle. That was the name of the young woman from the steakhouse. She was sweet, asked a lot of questions, laughed at his stories, made him feel big, but she didn't challenge his decisions, didn't shape his ideas, didn't sharpen his vision. At first, he loved that, until he realized he didn't grow around her. He just stayed the same. On the outside, Nolan's company was doing fine, still generating buzz, still raising capital. But something was off. His presentations started falling flat. His brand voice felt scattered. The team noticed. They started asking subtle questions. "Hey, who used to write the brand copy before? Didn't we used to have tighter campaign timelines?" Even the lead designer once asked, "Did Ariel take her creative process with her?" He'd laughed it off, but it stung. Because the truth was, she had. One evening, he searched her name again. This time, a new article popped up. 3 women shaping the future of branding in the Southeast. There she was. Third in the lineup, smiling, professional, not flashy, just undeniable. The pull in his chest was familiar, but it wasn't love. It was loss. The kind of loss you only feel when someone leaves without slamming the door, and you realize the silence she left behind sounds better than your noise. Meanwhile, Ariel didn't know or care that he was watching, because her world was full now. She was booked for a panel at the next branding summit. She had signed on 2 new clients, both referrals from her Charlotte success. And she had just said yes to a weekend trip to Napa with Sterling. Their first real vacation. He planned it down to the hour, but kept it all a surprise. All she had to do was show up. For once, that felt like enough. Sterling wasn't the type to rush milestones, but he was intentional. He didn't ask for Ariel's time. He created space for it. In the middle of busy weeks, he carved out moments that felt like stillness. Dinner at home with jazz humming softly in the background, handwritten. Notes slipped into her carry-on bag, or quiet drives through tree-lined neighborhoods just because they both needed silence and a view. It wasn't performative. It was peace. Ariel had spent years in a marriage that was all performance, where love was measured by optics, hand-holding at events, smiles at the right moments, coordinated Instagram posts. Sterling didn't touch her to be seen. He touched her because he felt her. That was new. Napa was no different. She didn't even know where they were going until they boarded the plane. He had simply said, "Pack 3 outfits, no heels, bring 1 dress." She hadn't asked further. The flight was private, quiet. She wore an oversized sweater and kept her curls tied back. Sterling read a book on leadership psychology while she flipped through a design journal. No rush, no awkward silences, just easy. They landed late in the afternoon, and a black SUV whisked them through winding back roads until the vineyards came into view. The house was warm-toned stone and glass, modern, tucked between tall olive trees. It wasn't opulent, but it breathed money in a quiet, effortless way. This place, Sterling said as they walked inside, was never about showing off. It's about shutting out. They cooked together that night. He chopped. She sautéed. They didn't talk about work, or Nolan, or anything that needed fixing. They talked about childhood fears, her love for interior spaces, his guilty obsession with vintage watches. After dinner, they sat out on the balcony, sipping wine and wrapped in one blanket. Sterling leaned in and said, "Do you know what I admire most about you?" She tilted her head. "Tell me. You don't perform strength. You are it, but you don't weaponize it." She went quiet, because she'd spent years being strong out of necessity, and never once did someone call it what it truly was, self-discipline without ego. She whispered, "Thank you." He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. The next morning, Sterling disappeared for an hour. When he returned, they took a short walk down a gravel path lined with lemon trees. He had reserved a private garden tasting at a small estate vineyard that didn't take walk-ins. The table was set for 2. Ariel chuckled. "This is a lot for wine." He smiled. "It's not about the wine." They were served 4 small pours. Then a 5th. The final glass arrived with a covered dome over a small plate. The sommelier stepped away. Sterling reached for the cover and slowly lifted it. Inside was a gold band. No diamonds, no glare, just elegance. Her breath caught. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply took her hand and said, "I don't need to fix you. I just want to walk beside you." Ariel didn't cry. She smiled. A long, full smile, the kind that sits behind the ribs for years before finally surfacing. Yes, that was all she said. That was all he needed. That evening, she called her sister. Camille screamed, then cried, then screamed again. "You deserve this, Ari," she said. "You deserve soft." Ariel whispered, "I didn't know love could feel like this." Like what? Like home with open windows. They returned to Atlanta 3 days later. Back to work, back to real life. But nothing felt the same. She was engaged, not just to a man, but to a new identity, one where she didn't shrink herself to make someone else look powerful. She was visible now, and not because someone finally saw her, but because she finally stopped hiding. Sterling didn't announce their engagement. There were no grand posts or press releases, but people noticed, in the way he reached for her hand without looking, in the way she smiled before entering a room, instead of after surviving it. Ariel didn't owe anyone an explanation, especially not Nolan. And yet, one came knocking. Literally, late one afternoon, as Ariel was wrapping up a Zoom call, her assistant buzzed her line. There's someone here asking to speak with you." No appointment. Name? Nolan Lennox. Her stomach didn't drop. She didn't freeze. She simply exhaled slowly and said, "Tell him I'm unavailable. He can reach out through legal if it's business related." A pause. Then, You sure? Very. She never looked out the window, but she knew he stood there for a while. Ariel's world didn't revolve around the spotlight, but it was finding her anyway. She had always believed that work done well didn't need a loud announcement. But excellence speaks, even when whispered. By spring, she was getting invitations she never expected. Speak at a women's business summit in Charleston. Collaborate with a high-end luxury rebrand in Austin. Judge a pitch competition hosted by a national venture capital firm. And then came the call from Forbes South. They were curating a feature on modern women redefining legacy in business. The editor had seen Ariel's blog post from months back, the one she wrote half asleep and fully honest. The one titled, "When You've Built Someone Else's Dream, and It's Time to Build Your Own." The post had gone quietly viral in small business circles. Now they wanted to photograph her, interview her, quote her. Ariel almost said no, but Sterling simply said, "If they're finally hearing your voice, don't whisper." The photo shoot was simple, clean. She wore cream trousers and a navy blouse. No overstyling, no excessive edits. She requested natural light, minimal retouching, and her curls left as they were. The photographer asked her to pose with her arms folded. She declined. "I don't need to look defensive, just grounded." The final photo ran on the cover of the business section the following month. And right beneath it was the quote they chose. "Power isn't how loud you speak. It's how clearly you stand." Ariel Vaughan. When Nolan saw the feature, he didn't know what to feel. He was in the middle of preparing a new funding deck when someone texted him the article. He opened it out of curiosity, not interest, and there she was. Not mentioned as his ex-wife, not linked to his accomplishments. She was standing in her own identity now, back straight, chin slightly tilted, a face that no longer carried the look of someone waiting to be acknowledged. She didn't mention him once, and yet he had never felt more exposed. Brielle walked into his office later that day with coffee. She saw the magazine opened on his desk. "Oh, wow. She looks different." Nolan didn't respond. Brielle sipped her latte. "Didn't you say she used to work in branding?" "She still does," he said flatly. "Guess she's doing all right." He nodded once and closed the magazine. But the image lingered, and so did the silence. Back in her own world, Ariel was preparing for something else. Sterling had invited her to attend Asheville Capital's annual retreat. It wasn't flashy, just a 3-day executive gathering in Asheville for portfolio founders and partners. A time to strategize, reset, and connect outside of boardrooms. She didn't feel like she belonged at first. Most attendees were CEOs and seasoned investors, the kind of people who casually said things like, "When I sold my second company." But Sterling made it clear. "You're not coming as my +1, he said. "You're coming as a partner, to me and to the future of this firm." She didn't argue. She prepared. The retreat was held at a luxury estate, nestled against the Blue Ridge Mountains. The weekend schedule included working sessions, quiet fireside discussions, and curated roundtables on innovation, equity, and growth. Ariel contributed quietly at first, but during a breakout session on brand equity, someone asked, "How do you build a personal brand without becoming a cliché?" A few voices chimed in. Generic advice. Sterling stayed silent. Then one of the other partners turned to Ariel. "What's your take?" She hesitated for half a second, then leaned in. "If your brand doesn't feel like the truest parts of you, people won't trust it. You can't fake resonance." The room went quiet for a moment. Then someone said, "That's it." Another added, "Can you write that down?" And just like that, she wasn't the +1 anymore. She was a voice. That evening, she and Sterling sat out on the terrace. He poured her a glass of wine and said, "You owned that room." She smiled. "I didn't mean to. I was just being honest. Exactly why it worked." He looked at her for a long moment. "You know, we haven't set a date yet." She raised an eyebrow. "Trying to rush me?" He laughed. "Never. I'm just ready when you are. I'll let you know when I am. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it. That's what made all the difference. Monday morning hit differently. Ariel returned from the Asheville retreat clear-headed, centered, and certain of one thing: she no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her consulting inbox had new inquiries. Her social media mentions had climbed, and a LinkedIn repost of her Forbes quote had gained over 10,000 views. Still, she didn't lead with noise. She opened her laptop like usual, checked her calendar, brewed tea. Routine kept her grounded. It reminded her that she built this peace. It didn't arrive by luck or by love. It came through decisions. And one of those decisions was never letting Nolan take up emotional space again. But life has a way of testing what you say you've healed from. It started with an email, subject line, touching base. Nolan, no greeting, no context. She stared at it for a few seconds, deleted it without opening. 2 days later, a bouquet arrived at her office. Cream peonies. Her favorite. No note, but she didn't need one. The florist confirmed who sent them. She dropped them in the trash without a pause. Then came the message. Late one evening, while she was reviewing edits on a campaign brief, her phone lit up. A number she didn't recognize. But the text was unmistakable. "I never got to say this the right way. I miss you. I see what you're doing now. And I'm sorry I didn't see it when I should have." She exhaled slowly. Not from sadness, but from clarity. The version of her who would have clung to that message no longer existed. She never replied. Instead, she closed her laptop, poured a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch beside Sterling. He was reading through founder notes, one hand resting on her knee. She looked over at him. "I got a message from Nolan." He didn't flinch, didn't ask for details, just looked her in the eye and said, "You okay?" She nodded. "He doesn't know how late he is." Sterling gave a quiet smile. "You don't owe anyone the old version of yourself." And that was that. But Nolan didn't stop. He emailed again the following week. This time, longer. "You were always the glue. I see that now. The way you've grown. It's beautiful. I messed up. We messed up. I wish we could talk. Just talk." She didn't delete it. She saved it. Not to reread, but as proof. Proof that closure doesn't come in words. It comes in choices. Her silence wasn't out of spite. It was out of understanding. Some things don't require explanation. Some people don't deserve access, no matter how well written their regret is. That weekend, she hosted her first virtual group branding session for women entrepreneurs of color. 9 women joined. Different industries, different backgrounds, but the same question burning beneath their pitches. How do I make people see me? Ariel's answer was simple. You don't wait to be seen. You start seeing yourself. Loudly, clearly, without apology. One of the women teared up. Another nodded hard. That was the moment Ariel realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a blueprint. After the session, she received a message from one of the attendees. "Thank you. I've never felt so powerful in a Zoom room before. Your presence gave me permission to take myself seriously." Ariel smiled and replied, "You were always powerful. You just needed to stop asking for permission." The following morning, she and Sterling went for a walk along the Beltline Trail. It was a breezy Sunday, coffee in hand, no phones, no meetings. He slid his arm around her waist as they strolled past a mural. It read, "Build quietly, let the world adjust to the sound of your strength." She paused to read it. Sterling looked over. "That could have been your quote." She grinned. "Maybe next time." He kissed her temple, then whispered, "Or maybe it already is." By the time Nolan sent a third email, subject line, "Can we meet?" it didn't even sting. She simply archived it and moved on with her day. There was no drama, no need for final words. Some doors don't slam shut. They just stop opening. By the time summer arrived, Ariel's calendar was packed. She wasn't chasing the spotlight, but it kept circling back to her. One of her early clients had landed a feature in a major business outlet and mentioned her name. That single mention triggered a chain of new inquiries, podcast requests, and speaking invites. But Ariel remained selective. She wasn't building a personal brand empire. She was building impact. and anything that didn't align with that vision, she turned down with grace. She had one rule: no interviews that focused on her personal life. If they asked about Sterling, she politely declined. If they dug for the divorce story, she redirected. Her past wasn't a brand story. It was a private lesson, and those are best shared through wisdom, not headlines. But behind closed doors, love was blooming. Sterling had moved into her home, a mid-century gem with warm wood tones and floor-to-ceiling windows just outside Atlanta. Their life was calm, rhythmic. Mornings started with silence and fresh coffee. Afternoons passed with both on work calls in opposite corners of the house. Evenings belonged to them. Sometimes they read. Sometimes they cooked. Sometimes they just sat on the patio and said nothing at all. And every night, Sterling kissed her hand before bed, the same way he did at their engagement dinner. Consistent, intentional, present. One Saturday evening, they hosted a small dinner at home. Just close friends, low lighting, jazz playing in the background. Ariel wore a deep brown wrap dress and bare feet. She moved easily in her own space, wine in hand, laughter flowing. She caught Sterling watching her from the kitchen doorway. "What?" she asked, smirking. He tilted his head slightly, just thinking, how many people wait their whole lives for what we have, and still never get it? She stepped closer. "You mean peace and perfect pasta?" He smiled. "Peace, yes. Pasta's a bonus." Later that night, as they cleared the dishes together, Sterling paused. "You still haven't set a wedding date?" She looked over her shoulder. "Not on purpose. You nervous?" "No." "Waiting?" "Yes." He didn't press. He simply said, "When you're ready, I'll already be there." What Ariel hadn't told him, not fully, was that she wanted to stand at that altar with nothing from her past lingering in her system. No residue, no loose ends, no hidden anger pretending to be peace. She wanted to walk towards Sterling not just healed, but free. That kind of emotional freedom wasn't quick. It was layered, quiet, and it required her to fully forgive herself, not for leaving Nolan, but for staying as long as she did. That night, after Sterling fell asleep, she sat up with a journal and wrote something she hadn't said aloud. "I used to think my silence was strength. Now I know my boundaries are." She closed the book and turned out the light. The next week brought news she didn't expect. The regional startup magazine that once crowned Nolan a rising star, they reached out to feature her. They'd seen her work, tracked her client success stories, and followed her online growth. The editor said, "Frankly, you're one of the most influential brand architects in the Southeast right now." She paused, then asked, "Would the feature focus on my current work?" "Absolutely," the editor said. "We're not looking for gossip. We're looking for what women like you are doing for the economy." She agreed. On one condition, no mention of Nolan, no history section, just facts. They honored that, and when the article went live a month later, the headline read, "The strategist they all slept on, until she made everyone pay attention." Sterling printed it, framed it, hung it above her home office desk without asking. She rolled her eyes when she saw it. "Seriously? Every general deserves a banner," he said. Meanwhile, Nolan saw it too. He didn't react publicly, but when Brielle mentioned, "Didn't she used to work with you?" he answered too quickly. "She worked for me." Brielle tilted her head. "That's not how it reads." He said nothing after that, because deep down he knew. The power she gave him was borrowed, and now that she'd taken it back, nothing he built looked the same. The gala invitation came on cream cardstock, hand-delivered. Ariel almost dismissed it. She'd stopped attending public business events months ago. Too many rooms where people smiled politely but listened performatively. Too many questions layered in disguised curiosity about her rise and her past. But this one was different. The Innovate Impact Fund was celebrating a decade of investing in underrepresented founders across the Southeast. Sterling's firm was a platinum sponsor, and he wasn't attending alone. "You're on the guest list either way," he told her over dinner. "But I'd rather walk in with you." She glanced down at the envelope, then back at him. "Black tie?" He nodded. And a little press. She smiled. Then let them take pictures. Ariel didn't go for show. She chose a sleek black silk gown, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a soft bun, understated, elegant. Sterling wore a tailored midnight tuxedo with a matte lapel and no tie, polished, relaxed, powerful. They didn't arrive first or last, but when they walked in, heads turned, not because of flash, but because of energy. Together, they looked like stillness in a storm, like two people who didn't need to command the room adjusted for them. Ariel spoke with 3 founders she had mentored that year, hugged 2 former clients, congratulated the event chair. She kept a low profile, but even that drew attention. People noticed how Sterling stayed close but never hovered, how Ariel never chased conversations, only welcomed them, how they shared looks that said more than any words ever could. Midway through the night, Sterling leaned toward her and whispered, "You've had the room since we walked in." She laughed softly. "You say that like you're surprised." "Not surprised, just proud." She excused herself to the restroom. On her way back, she froze. There, standing across the hallway, was Nolan, in a tux, drink in hand, and beside him, smiling tightly, stood Brielle, in a red dress and heels too high for comfort. Ariel hadn't known he'd be invited. He wasn't a sponsor, but he had once been a portfolio founder, and apparently that was enough for a courtesy ticket. He saw her before she looked away, and for the first time in years, he didn't look smug. He looked unsettled. She didn't rush past. She didn't acknowledge him. She walked past calmly, head high, without even a flicker of emotion. 3 minutes later, she was back at Sterling's side. He caught her gaze. "You good?" "Just walked through a memory. Need to leave?" "No," she said, lifting her glass. "Let's toast to the present." They clinked gently and kept moving forward. But Nolan didn't. He watched them from across the room. The way Sterling placed his hand gently at the small of her back. The way Ariel smiled without restraint. The way people looked at her, not as someone's former wife, but as someone on her own. He realized, too late, that the woman he had taken for granted was now out of reach. Not just emotionally, but publicly. She wasn't quietly rebuilding anymore. She had rebuilt, completely, and with someone who matched her, not just admired her. Later that night, when guests were mingling near the gallery walls, someone from the press approached. "Excuse me," she said to Ariel and Sterling. "We're gathering a few shots of our power couples tonight. Would you two mind stepping toward the light?" Sterling looked at Ariel. She nodded once. They stood together, side by side, and posed. Nothing dramatic, just eyes locked, shoulders squared, Sterling's hand gently resting on her waist. The flash went off. Click. The image would be used in the next week's write-up with the headline, "Strategist and Investor Quietly Command the Room. No introduction needed." That same photo would circulate on business pages across LinkedIn, Twitter, and local press. And in every shot, Nolan was blurred in the background. Just watching, unacknowledged, uninvited to her future. It wasn't the gala. It wasn't the press photo. It wasn't even Nolan in the background. What stayed with Ariel the most was how safe she felt standing beside Sterling. Not guarded, not put together for show, just seen and still soft. They flew back from the gala on a Sunday morning. She was quiet most of the flight, not withdrawn, just reflective. Sterling didn't press. He simply held her hand while she watched the clouds roll by. When they landed, they didn't go to brunch. They didn't scroll. They didn't even unpack. They napped, side by side, his arm beneath her neck, her palm resting over his heart. And when she woke, she whispered, "I've never felt this." Rested. He kissed her forehead. That's what peace does. It holds you, even when you're asleep. The weeks that followed were slower. Sterling paused a few investments to refocus on internal strategy. Ariel turned down 2 press interviews and delayed a rebrand campaign. They both needed stillness, not because things were falling apart, but because they were finally stable enough to breathe. On a Thursday evening, Ariel cooked pasta while Sterling played a Coltrane vinyl. She stood barefoot, sauce simmering, hair loose over her shoulders. He leaned against the counter, watching her stir with a wooden spoon. "You look like you belong in this moment." She glanced at him. "That's because I do." "No part of you feels pulled." "No, that's the part I've worked hardest for, learning how to be in the room I prayed to be in." He walked behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed the back of her neck. Then whispered, "I want to marry you. Whenever you say the word." That night, they didn't plan a wedding. They planned a life. They sat on the rug with glasses of wine and notebooks, mapping out what mattered. And a smaller ceremony, just family. No destination, no drama. A legacy fund for black women in branding. A biannual travel, not for Instagram, but for quiet. And one home, fully theirs. Not rented, not staged, home. By midnight, her cheeks hurt from smiling. She wasn't planning a fairy tale. She was designing her reality, and for the first time, she wasn't building it for someone else. Ariel began to see love differently. It wasn't in the expensive dates, or the headlines, or the soft claps from strangers when she walked into a room. It was in the details, the way Sterling never interrupted, how he sent flowers not when she succeeded, but when she was overwhelmed, and how he listened to her client meetings from down the hall, just to say afterward, "You held your ground without pushing." How he touched her like a question, never an assumption. One night, during a thunderstorm, the power flickered out. Candles were lit, phones set aside. They sat in bed, legs intertwined, silence between them. He traced slow circles on her thigh, and she whispered, "You make me feel like I don't need to be perfect." Sterling replied, "You make me feel like I don't need to perform." That was the kind of intimacy she never had before. Not based in performance, not built on appearances, but rooted in rest. She didn't have to explain every pause. He didn't try to fix every wound. They simply held space, and in that space, love grew. Strong, steady, quiet. It was a Tuesday when he asked again. Not with a ring this time. Not with a crowd or a photographer hidden behind trees. They were in the middle of meal prep, her hands dusted with flour, his rolling up sleeves to rinse vegetables. And between chopping and soft jazz playing from the speaker, Sterling said, "I booked a weekend in Savannah next month. The chapel we talked about, it's available." Ariel paused, looked over. "You want to?" "I do. Not for the wedding, for the commitment." She stared at him, not startled, not uncertain, and said softly, "Then let's go see it." The chapel wasn't grand. No marble, no stained glass. Just wood, light, and silence. The walls whispered peace. When they arrived, it was empty. The coordinator had opened it early just for them. Ariel walked slowly down the center aisle, fingertips brushing each wooden pew. She turned in a slow circle, then stopped. Sterling stood near the altar, hands in his pockets, watching her like he had all the time in the world. And in that moment, she saw it. Not the moment she said "I do," but the years that would come after. Quiet dinners, morning walks, decisions made together in whispers, not war. So, when she reached him, she simply nodded. This is where it happens. They didn't choose a date on the spot. They didn't rush home to send out invites. They left the chapel, walked hand in hand toward the car, and stopped for ice cream instead. In jeans, in sneakers, in love. Back in Atlanta, she told her mother first. They sat on the porch, tea between them, breeze moving through the trees. "I'm going to marry him." Her mother didn't cry, didn't gasp. She just smiled and said, "You already have. You just need the moment to catch up." Ariel reached for her hand and held it. Soft, strong, no noise. The next few weeks were slow and beautiful. They finalized the venue, set a date quietly. Ariel ordered a simple gown online. No custom fitting, no dramatic silhouette, just elegance, ease, hers. Sterling bought a navy suit he planned to wear again and again. Nothing loud, Nothing viral. They weren't chasing a wedding. They were walking into a life. One night, while Ariel reviewed client notes, Sterling entered the room with a box. She looked up. Another gift? No. She opened it anyway. Inside, wrapped in a soft cloth, was a small gold locket. No diamonds, no inscription, just a folded note inside. This is for every piece of yourself you had to carry alone. From now on, you won't carry them by yourself anymore. She closed the locket, and then her eyes, and then the distance between them. When she kissed him that night, it wasn't urgent. It was honest. They lay in bed for hours after, legs tangled, silence between them. Not the silence of discomfort, the silence of belonging. Ariel rested her head on his chest and whispered, "I never thought love could be this gentle." Sterling held her closer and said, "Gentle doesn't mean small. This is stronger than anything I've ever known. Have you ever experienced love that didn't need proving, just presence? Sometimes the loudest kind of love isn't the one with grand gestures or public declarations. It's the quiet hand on your back, the one who stays when no one's watching." Ariel didn't need saving. She needed someone who honored her softness and never asked her to shrink. If you've ever found peace in love, or hope to, drop A in the comments. And if you believe gentle love is powerful too, tap subscribe. We tell stories here that don't scream. They stay with you. The day of the ceremony was unseasonably warm. Late fall in Atlanta usually brought crisp mornings and early dusks. But this Friday afternoon felt sunlit and slow, like it was waiting for something. Ariel stood at her vanity, pressing a pearl earring into place. Her gown wasn't extravagant, just soft white silk that hugged without clinging and moved like water when she walked. Sterling was already downstairs, talking with the photographer. No nerves, no pacing, just his usual calm, quiet readiness. He had been ready long before she was, and he never rushed her. They weren't hosting a wedding. They were honoring a decision, one already made 1,000 times in silence. The venue was a private estate outside the city. No ballroom, no aisle, just a curved arch beneath cypress trees, strung with soft white lights. 35 guests, all seated in rows of hand-finished wood, facing an altar that looked more like a promise than a stage. Ariel's mother held her hand before she stepped out. "You're not walking toward a man," she whispered. "You're walking toward yourself, with someone beside you." Ariel blinked slowly, then nodded. Sterling turned the moment she appeared. No surprise on his face, just stillness. As if he had seen her coming long before this day, she reached him. He took both her hands in his. No officiant speeches, no reading of vows. They had agreed on one thing: speak only what you mean, and say only what's needed. Sterling went first. "I don't vow to make you happy. I vow to protect the peace you found on your own and never disturb it." Ariel smiled, eyes damp but steady. "I don't vow to complete you," she said softly. "I vow to walk beside you as I stay whole, and honor the way you do the same." They kissed once, brief, full, no cheering, just breath, and a collective exhale. The reception was small and warm. No first dance, no speeches, no performative moments, just good music, soft laughter, and shared food. Sterling's business partner leaned over at one point and said, "This doesn't feel like a wedding. It feels like the beginning of a better story." He was right. Later that night, they returned home. Still in her gown, Ariel kicked off her heels and stood barefoot in the living room. Sterling opened a bottle of wine and handed her a glass. "To us," he said. She touched her glass to his. "To never losing ourselves again." They sat on the couch, music low, the city dim outside their window. She rested her head on his chest, her hand over his heart, and whispered, "Thank you for never asking me to perform." He responded, "Thank you for never needing to." In another part of the city, Nolan scrolled past the wedding post. A mutual connection had reshared the image. Ariel in her silk gown, Sterling in that midnight suit, the two of them standing beneath the cypress arch. No hashtags, no captions, just a single line, stillness, strength, love. He stared at the photo for a long time. Brielle came into the room, asked something he didn't hear. He clicked his phone screen off before answering, and as she kissed his cheek, all he could feel was absence. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Ariel received an unexpected call. It was from Marsha Ellington, director of the Southeastern Women in Innovation Forum, a prestigious annual event held in Atlanta. "We're honoring 10 women whose impact has shifted the business and cultural landscape in the region," Marsha said. "And you're one of them." Ariel sat in silence for a beat. "I appreciate that. Truly, we'd love for you to speak. 5 minutes, something personal, not just business. The theme this year is voice and visibility. You've embodied both." Ariel looked down at her open notebook, still filled with sketches from her wedding plans. Her new last name, Callan, scribbled at the top of a to-do list. "I'll do it," she said. The event would be held at the Fulton Cultural Center, a place Ariel had driven past for years but never stepped inside. It was a circular space with tiered seats, soft lighting, and a stage that didn't elevate speakers too high above the audience. That alone made her say yes. She didn't want a stage. She wanted eye contact. Sterling helped her prepare. He didn't write her speech. He didn't rehearse it for her. He simply asked the right questions while they sipped tea each evening. What did you wish someone had said to you when you were stuck? What do you want women to know about being powerful and still tender? What truth have you been carrying that's never been spoken out loud? She answered them in pieces. Sticky notes, scribbled margins, notes in her phone. Until finally, the speech wrote itself. The night of the forum, she wore navy. Not black. She was done with hiding. Not white. She didn't need to prove rebirth. Just navy. Steady. Clear. Hers. Her name was listed last on the program, the final speaker of the evening. As she waited backstage, she looked through the curtain at the audience. She didn't expect to see Nolan. But there he was, 3rd row, sitting alone. His company was one of the forum's platinum donors. Of course. She looked away just as he glanced toward the curtain, too late to catch her. When they called her name, she stepped onto the stage without notes. The lights weren't blinding. She could see every face, and in the silence before she spoke, she saw something powerful. No one was on their phones. They were ready. So she began. "A few years ago, I was in every room except my own. I was behind the curtain, behind the strategy, behind someone else's voice, trying to make sure it sounded strong enough to open doors. And I did it well, so well that when I stopped doing it, people didn't recognize who I was anymore. But I did. And that changed everything. The room was still. No murmurs. No clinking glasses. Just breath." She continued. "They'll call it a comeback. They'll say you stepped into your light. But what they won't say, what they don't say, is that healing doesn't look like noise. It looks like boundaries. It sounds like silence. It feels like watching someone underestimate you and choosing not to correct them, because you know who you are now. And you don't need them to catch up." Somewhere in the back, someone wiped a tear. Someone else leaned forward in their seat. Nolan did neither. He stared at a woman who once lay next to him, smaller than she deserved to be. Now, she filled the entire room, and she didn't mention his name, not even once. That was what gutted him most. To every woman who ever helped someone rise, then got left behind, this is your reminder. What you build quietly becomes the loudest part of your story. You don't need revenge. You don't need an audience. You just need to keep going until you look around and realize you didn't lose anything. You found you. She stepped off the stage to a standing ovation, not thunderous, not dramatic, but steady, sustained, the kind that doesn't need hype because it's rooted in truth. Marsha hugged her backstage. "You didn't just speak," she said. "You left a mark." Sterling found her near the back hallway, eyes glowing. He said nothing at first, just wrapped his arms around her, forehead resting against hers. That was you, she nodded. All me. Finally, they left before the reception. No networking, no handshakes. Just quiet. They stopped at a late-night spot for tea and a shared slice of apple tart. They sat at the corner table, and Ariel laughed softly. What? Sterling leaned in, smiling. You've never looked more powerful. I didn't raise my voice. Exactly. Meanwhile, Nolan exited the building without saying a word to anyone. He got into the back of his car, told the driver to wait, and sat there in silence. The words she spoke repeated in his head like a slow echo. And for the first time in a long time, he realized she wasn't just gone, she had arrived. And he was just a chapter she closed without needing to reread. 3 weeks after the forum, Ariel received an invitation from Ashcroft Ventures. It was their annual leadership gala, a high-profile, high-visibility night attended by investors, CEOs, public figures, and media partners. The theme this year, Legacy in Motion. Sterling's firm, Ashvale, was a major stakeholder in 2 Ashcroft-backed tech accelerators. He was expected to attend. Ariel wasn't. But the invite came addressed to her directly. No +1, no assistant, no title, just her name, Mrs. Ariel Callan, and beneath it, in clean silver ink, "We look forward to honoring your impact." She had no desire to attend. None. She hadn't set foot in an Ashcroft event since her early days beside Nolan, back when she was the unseen strategist, dressed in muted colors, standing in the shadows while he soaked up attention. But this time, she wasn't coming as someone's silent supporter. She was arriving as herself. She didn't tell Sterling what to wear. He showed up in a sharp grey suit, no tie, a watch Ariel had gifted him after closing her largest contract. She wore emerald green, not soft green, not dusty sage, but deep gleaming emerald, a color that said, "I'm not here to compete. I'm here to be acknowledged." They arrived fashionably late, not for effect, but because Ariel had stopped performing for timelines that weren't hers. As they entered the ballroom, heads turned. Sterling kept his hand resting gently against the small of her back, not possessively, supportively. Ariel's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as they moved through the crowd. She nodded politely to a few familiar faces, accepted compliments, declined champagne, and then, mid-conversation with a founder she once mentored, she saw him. Nolan stood near the far side of the ballroom. Next to him, clinging to his arm, was Brielle. Same woman, different dress, same posture. Nolan looked older than she remembered. Not physically, but in the way he stood, like he was holding up a version of himself that no longer felt easy to carry. He didn't see her yet, but Brielle did. And the look on her face, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and recognition. She whispered something to Nolan. He turned, and for a moment, time didn't stop. It slowed. Ariel didn't blink, didn't turn away. She simply walked toward them. Not fast, not theatrical, just direct, with Sterling walking beside her like a steady shadow. Nolan stiffened. Brielle's grip on his arm loosened. Ariel stopped 2 feet from them, offered a calm smile and said, "Hi. It's been a while." Nolan opened his mouth, closed it, nodded once. "Ariel." She turned to Brielle. "Nice to finally meet you. I've seen you before, briefly." Brielle flushed but managed a quiet, "You too." Ariel didn't linger. She turned slightly, motioned towards Sterling. "This is my husband, Sterling Callan." Sterling extended his hand with ease. "Good to meet you." Nolan hesitated, then shook it. "Same here." Sterling added, "Ariel told me you're great at scaling fast growth teams. I've read a few things." Nolan managed a strained smile. "Thanks." Ariel didn't offer more. No shade. No stares. She simply nodded once and said, "Enjoy the evening." Then she walked away. The conversation resumed like nothing happened, but the air behind her, different. They found their seats, front row near the stage. Sterling placed a hand on her thigh beneath the table and leaned in. "You didn't flinch once." Why would I? She whispered. I don't owe him anything. Not a reaction, not a look, not a moment. He smiled. You gave him something more powerful. What? Your peace. Nolan watched them from a distance. He didn't say a word to Brielle for 10 minutes. She kept checking her phone, scrolling, sipping. He didn't even see her. He saw Ariel, the way she moved, smiled, nodded as guests approached. There was no resentment in her presence, only resolve. She had rewritten the room and didn't need anyone's permission to do it. An hour later, the event director called her name, Ariel Callan, honored for reshaping narrative strategy and brand identity across the Southeast. A soft round of applause. Sterling squeezed her hand once as she rose. She didn't glance toward Nolan, didn't glance toward anyone. She walked to the stage, collected her award, spoke 2 sentences. Visibility isn't always about being seen by others. Sometimes it's about finally seeing yourself. Thank you. The room applauded. And Nolan? He clapped too, because what else could he do? When the woman he underestimated had become the woman everyone else stood up for. The gala ended at 10:13 p.m. Ariel and Sterling didn't stay for the closing remarks. They slipped out quietly, fingers interlocked, the award tucked in. Her clutch bag like a gentle reminder, not a trophy, just proof. Proof that what you build in silence becomes undeniable with time. Back home, she stepped out of her heels and placed the award on the bookshelf in her office. Not at the center, not under a spotlight. Just present, like her. Sterling handed her a glass of water, kissed her temple, and disappeared into the bedroom. She stood alone in the soft hallway light, her fingers tracing the edge of the plaque. She wasn't thinking of the speech, or the camera flashes. She was thinking about how it all felt like breathing now. No holding her stomach in, no calculating her tone, no shrinking. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer. It buzzed again. Then, a message. I know it's late, but I owe you something. Can we meet tomorrow? Nolan. She stared at it. She wasn't surprised. People always reached for what they abandoned. When they saw it shining in someone else's arms, she placed the phone face down, went to bed, slept without dreams. In the morning, over coffee, she told Sterling. He didn't flinch, didn't ask for details. He just said, "What do you want to do?" She took a long sip. Then, "I want to go." Sterling nodded once. Then go. No guard up, no guilt, just finish what you started. They met at a small cafe in Midtown. Neutral ground, public, daylight. Ariel arrived 5 minutes early. Nolan was already seated. No tie, no blazer. Just him, the version that used to be enough for her. Now, he looked unfinished. She sat across from him, calm, unbothered. He spoke first. "I saw you." "At the gala." She nodded. "You looked happy." "I am." He hesitated. "You're different." "I'm myself." Finally, he exhaled. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this anyway." She let him. "I ruined it. I didn't see what I had. Not really. Not until you were gone. And I thought maybe part of you still wonders. Still." "I don't," she said, gently but firmly. He blinked. "You don't what?" "Wonder. I don't revisit the story. I don't reread the pages. I lived it. I learned from it. But I don't carry it anymore." Nolan swallowed. "I guess I deserve that." She leaned forward. "You don't need to be punished, Nolan. You just need to accept that growth doesn't always include reconciliation." He sat back, quiet. She continued. "I didn't come here to blame you or to hear apologies. I came to say this: I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I needed to stop bleeding in places you'll never be." He looked down. "Do you ever think about what we could have been?" Ariel tilted her head slightly. "I used to, and now. I'm too full of what is to wonder about what never became." Silence stretched between them. This time, she let it. Then she stood, No rush, no bitterness. I wish you well, Nolan. He looked up. Is that it? She smiled softly. That's everything. She walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. That evening, she came home to dinner already started. Sterling was at the stove, humming a slow rhythm, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked up when she entered. All good? All done, she said. He smiled, came around the island, and kissed her slow. She leaned into him, her hands resting flat on his chest. You were right, she whispered. About what? I didn't owe him a single thing. After dinner, they sat on the patio. Ariel opened her journal, not to write about Nolan, but to list names of young women she wanted to mentor in the coming year. There were 12 so far, each one carrying stories that looked like hers. Before the breakthrough, she looked at Sterling, then up at the stars, and in the stillness of the moment, she knew she hadn't just closed a chapter. She had outgrown the entire book. Fall faded into winter slowly. The leaves in their backyard turned a quiet bronze, then scattered across. The stone pathway like reminders that even beauty must let go to grow. Ariel and Sterling had started a new rhythm, not rushed, not driven by optics, but intentional. A partnership built on presence. Every Sunday morning was for the two of them. Phones off, music low, pajamas until noon. They called it the vow of stillness. Because with everything their lives had become, the headlines, the quiet mentions, the rising attention, what they protected most was the peace they built between them. Sterling had shifted too. His firm was expanding into early-stage mentorship for underrepresented founders, and he asked Ariel to lead brand identity training for their first accelerator cohort. She didn't say yes right away. She never jumped at power. She asked, "Is this because I'm your wife, or because I'm the best person for the job?" Sterling replied without hesitation, "I didn't ask you. I asked the woman whose work helped triple my client's brand equity in 1 year." She grinned, then put it in writing. He laughed. Already drafted. The program launched in January. 6 founders, all women, all black, all building something no one else believed in. Yet, Ariel didn't hold back. She didn't coddle them, didn't tone down her critiques. But she also didn't speak over them. She taught them what no one taught her. How to claim space before someone offers it. How to name their value without apology. How to build brands that echo who they are, not just what they sell. One founder said, "You're the first person to make me feel smart without making me feel small." That night, Ariel cried, not because she was overwhelmed, but because someone had finally spoken a truth she'd worked years to model. Meanwhile, her name was spreading, not just in branding circles, but in rooms where policy, innovation, and equity conversations were happening. She was invited to DC to speak at the National Economic Opportunity Summit. This time, she wasn't closing the night. She was opening it. Keynote. Her name in bold at the top of the program. Ariel Callan, strategic advisor, entrepreneur, equity architect. The title didn't make her nervous. The weight did, but she wore it well. Because it wasn't about being perfect anymore. It was about being real. 2 days before the summit, she and Sterling sat on the couch, her speech notes scattered across their coffee table. He didn't look at the words. He looked at her. "You know what makes your voice powerful?" he asked. She shook her head. "You don't speak for applause. You speak for alignment." She smiled. "That's a beautiful way to say I don't chase claps." Sterling leaned in. Because the right people don't clap for noise. They move when the message is true. The day of the keynote, the hall was full. Not a gala crowd, not a startup room, but decision makers, legislators, CEOs, public sector leaders. Ariel stood at the podium, spine straight, hands steady, and she opened with this. "The first time I realized I wasn't being seen, I smiled harder. The second time, I worked twice as much. The third time, I walked away. Visibility isn't always earned by volume. Sometimes it's born when you start listening to yourself more than the world. She didn't give a speech. She gave a mirror. To every woman who had ever led from the back row. To every founder who had been called a bit much for speaking clearly. To every strategist told she was just the support. The room stood when she finished, not because of celebrity, but because they saw themselves in her. Backstage, a senator approached her. "I've heard dozens of keynote speeches," the woman said, "but yours made me rethink how I carry my own voice." Ariel shook her hand and said, "Then it landed." Back in Atlanta, Sterling had the whole house lit with candles. No music, just warmth. When she walked in, he said nothing. He just held her face in his hands and kissed her softly, then whispered, "Welcome back, keynote." She laughed into his chest. "I'm not the show. No, you're the shift." That night, in the dark, lying chest to chest, Sterling said something that stayed with her. "We don't need a legacy that trends. We need one that trains the next generation to believe in themselves sooner." Ariel nodded against him. "That's all I want," she said. "To be the reason someone speaks without shrinking." The keynote replayed across multiple platforms. Clips from Ariel's speech were shared by equity groups, economic roundtables, and even a few state agencies. One quote in particular went viral. "If they only see your silence as cooperation, then it's time to speak. Not to get louder, but to get clearer." Her inbox swelled with media requests. But she wasn't interested in being famous. She was focused on influence, the kind that lived in the rooms without hashtags. So when a senior director from one of the country's largest funding bodies reached out requesting a meeting, she didn't say yes for clout. She said yes because she knew who she could bring with her. That afternoon, she invited two of her mentees to join the call. One was a founder building a wellness brand rooted in ancestral care. The other, a data engineer creating tech tools for social workers in under-resourced neighborhoods. They sat beside her, nervous but prepared. When the call ended, both women looked at Ariel like she had opened a door they never knew existed. Because she had, and she didn't need to explain why. She just smiled and said, "Your story belongs in the room. Don't shrink." Sterling watched all of it unfold, not from the sidelines, but from beside her, shoulder to shoulder. He never once tried to eclipse her momentum. He elevated it. When Ariel launched her initiative, the Brand Seat Project, aimed at training 100 women of color in business storytelling, he signed on as her first funder, not as a husband, as a believer, not intentionally, but it was impossible not to. Her image showed up on LinkedIn banners, her words quoted in investor newsletters. Even his new assistant brought up her project one morning while reading from a Business Digest. "She's really doing something big," the assistant had said. Nolan just nodded. He no longer responded with bitterness. He responded with silence, because he finally understood. Ariel didn't leave him. She outgrew the version of herself that needed him to see her. And now? The whole world did. In late spring, she was invited to return to the Ashcroft stage, not as a guest, not even as a panelist, but as the honoree for the annual Vision Award. The moment would be televised, streamed, photographed. She considered declining, but Sterling said something that stuck. "You've walked through every room they tried to lock. It's time you walked back in and left the door open." So, she said yes. The night of the award, she wore soft gold. Nothing loud, nothing regal, just light that moved when she did. The ballroom was familiar, but this time she didn't feel like she needed to prepare for anything. She was ready, because she'd stopped asking for readiness. She simply was. As she walked toward the stage, she noticed the front row. Sterling, seated in full support. Next to him, Brielle, with no Nolan beside her. Just her, alone. Their eyes met. Ariel didn't break stride, but in that moment, Brielle looked away first, not from shame, but from the quiet weight of realizing. Ariel hadn't just moved on. She had risen. The host handed her the Glass Award. "Your work has helped shift not just narratives, but power," he said. "We're honored." Ariel stepped to the mic, paused, then began. When I started, I thought visibility was about being in the spotlight. Now I know. It's about seeing yourself so clearly that no one else's gaze can define you. She didn't thank everyone. She didn't list her wins. She closed with just this. If you're in the room tonight, wondering if you're still stuck in the chapter they wrote for you, understand this. You have the right to edit your story, or start a new book altogether. One where you're no longer a supporting role in someone else's rise, but the author of your own becoming. The applause wasn't instant. It was delayed, then strong, then lasting. Sterling met her at the bottom of the stage steps. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He simply held out his hand. She took it, and the flash from the press cameras captured that single image. Her smile, his stillness, their legacy. Ariel didn't cry that night. Not after the speech. Not when the ballroom emptied and her award was carefully boxed for delivery. Not even when Sterling leaned over and whispered, "You still take my breath." Because peace doesn't always announce itself with tears. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through a cracked window over warm skin, under soft lighting, and sits beside you like it's always belonged. That night, they didn't attend the after-party. They went home, to the house they'd built with intention. No ghosts, no echoes of who they had to be for others, just them, and the calm. Sterling poured her a glass of pomegranate juice, the kind she liked chilled, and placed it in her favorite mug. They didn't say much. The silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. Later, as she changed into a cotton robe and clipped her hair back, he followed her into the bedroom and placed the award on her nightstand. Then he turned off his phone, turned down the lights, and held her like he hadn't in a long time, not because they hadn't touched, but because something about that night redefined intimacy. Not the physical, but the knowing that he didn't need to fix her, prove her, save her. She'd done that for herself. He just had to witness it. And he did, with hands that knew where she held tension and a heart that finally matched the rhythm of hers. By morning, the world buzzed around them. But inside the Carrington home, time slowed. Over breakfast, Sterling read aloud a quote from a news article covering the award gala. "Ariel Carrington is proof that elegance and power are not opposites. They are a lineage." She shook her head and laughed. "You think they'll still say that when I wear my hoodie to the bodega?" Sterling leaned in, kissed the corner of her mouth. "They'd be smart to—" She got quiet then, her smile softening. "You know, I used to think this kind of life had to be earned through pain." He put his fork down. "And now I know. It had to be reclaimed through honesty." She sipped her tea. "I was never hard to love. I was just too easy to overlook." That same week, a letter arrived. A handwritten envelope, no return address. Inside, a folded sheet of cream stationery. Nolan's handwriting. No grand opening. Just 5 lines. "I won't ask to meet. I won't intrude, but I needed you to know. I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry I waited until the light was no longer mine to understand its glow. Be well, Ariel." She didn't show the letter to Sterling. Not because of secrecy, but because there was nothing left to say. Ariel placed it in a drawer with a quiet mind. No anger, no regret, only release. That weekend, the Brand Seat Project held its first full-day retreat. Sterling offered the venue, a mid-sized learning center with breakout rooms and a courtyard. He hired a caterer, paid for printing materials, had a videographer document the event, but he didn't give speeches, he didn't pose in photos. He showed up to stack chairs, run cables, and refill water coolers. At one point, Ariel watched him help an elder woman find her session. The woman, unaware of who he was, asked, "Are you Ariel's assistant?" Sterling smiled. "Something like that." Ariel watched the exchange from across the hallway, her chest tightening, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She had once been with a man who needed everyone to know he was in the room. Now she was married to a man who made sure she had the room, and let her shine in it. Later that night, they sat outside in their backyard. No music, no distractions, just a sky full of slow stars. Sterling passed her a blanket. "You know what I've learned watching you this year?" he asked. She turned to him, curious. He didn't wait. "You didn't fall in love with me because I was safe or wealthy or stable. You fell in love because I let you be seen." She nodded, eyes glistening. "And I stayed in love," she whispered, "because you never punished me for becoming more than what you met." He reached for her hand. "Never will." Ariel leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in her life, she believed love didn't require sacrifice to be real. It required truth. And truth was what she finally lived in. The early afternoon sun bathed the rolling Sonoma hills in soft light, casting golden warmth over the small vineyard estate Sterling had chosen for the wedding. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be. It was real. And that's all Ariel wanted. Guests took their seats along a curved path lined with white chairs and lush olive trees. The air smelled of earth, wine, and blooming jasmine. There were no paparazzi, no staged moments, only friends, only family, only truth. Ariel stepped out from the villa, her gown soft and flowing like the breeze that swept across the hills. Her hair was styled simply, a flower tucked above her ear. No veil, no pretense. Sterling stood at the end of the aisle. His suit was charcoal, his shoes dusty from walking barefoot through the grounds earlier that morning, nerves settling. But when he saw her, his chest lifted with a breath he hadn't even realized. He'd been holding since the day she'd walked away from their old life. This was not the same man she had once shared a mansion with. This man had waited for her outside a courtroom. He had walked the truth with her. He had earned the right to stand here. As she stepped closer, every lie, every betrayal, every cold night sleeping apart. It all fell away like the petals gently drifting from the arbor overhead. The officiant began with a quiet smile. "Sterling and Ariel have asked to speak their own vows, not written, not rehearsed, only spoken from the heart." Sterling turned first. He looked at Ariel like she was light he'd never seen until he learned to look inward. "I used to think love was control, strategy, keeping things neat, quiet, orderly. I was wrong. I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you gave it. You gave it with your actions, not your words. And I realized that real love doesn't keep score. It rebuilds, one moment at a time. Ariel, I don't want to be perfect. I just want to be worthy of this, of you, of us." Ariel blinked slowly, lips pressed, breathing deeply through the storm of emotion forming in her chest. She spoke, voice trembling with clarity. "When I met you, I was a woman trying to be enough, for everyone, for you, for your world. And when it broke, I thought I was broken too. But what I learned is that love isn't about being chosen by someone. It's about choosing yourself. And still, being open when someone comes back changed. You didn't come back the same, Sterling. You came back honest. And I choose you, not because I need to, but because I want to." A pause. Then applause. Not the forced kind, but soft, joyful clapping from people who'd watched two souls burn, rebuild, and now stand whole again. The rings were slipped on without a fuss. The kiss was tender, short, reverent, smiling. And then the officiant said what everyone had been waiting for. "By the truth you've spoken, and the love you've chosen to fight for, I now pronounce you husband and wife." They turned, hands laced. No one cheered loudly. No one threw petals. But someone cried quietly. A friend, a mother, maybe Ariel herself, because it was done. The chapter that began with betrayal now ended in dignity. That night, the guests had all gone. The vines slept under the stars. And inside the small honeymoon suite, Ariel sat at the edge of the bed in Sterling's shirt, her ring hand resting over her heart. Sterling walked over, a glass of red wine in hand for her. He knelt. "Thank you for marrying me," he whispered. She tilted her head. "You finally learned," she said, "that I was never something you could own. I was always someone you had to honor." And for the first time in a long time, Sterling didn't answer. He just kissed her palm and held it there. Because some truths don't need repeating. They need remembering. If this story made your heart feel something, keep listening. Maybe you've loved someone who let you down. Maybe you gave someone one last chance, and they proved they were worth it. What was your favorite part of Ariel and Sterling's journey? Did she handle the betrayal the right way, or would you have walked away sooner? Drop A in the comments if you believe healing is possible after betrayal, but only if they come back better. Tap subscribe to join the family, because more stories like this are coming. Let's talk in the comments.